Hello, my crafty friends. This is Monica from Allsewpetite. Welcome back to my channel. I decided to pop in today and do a sort of live class, live demonstration because last week I shared that I'm making another tote bag. I'm using my tote bag pattern to create new tote bag because my old one has already worn out, and I thought I want to customize it with this adorable hidden zipper pocket. So I like to call it hidden because it's kind of hiding beneath that placket. And I received a lot of messages on Instagram if I could show you how to do it, how to hack, how to modify the pattern. So this is exactly what I'm going to show you today. I just want to preface that you can use any pattern that you like. If you've got a favorite pattern and you would love to add this type of zipper pocket either to the front, back, inside your bag, you can absolutely do it. I'm going to use my tote bag pattern for the demonstration, but the process, the steps are exactly the same for whatever project you are making. So let me just put this back aside. I just want to mention that this pocket is also fully lined, just in case if you had any questions. So I'll just put that back aside and I'll grab my paper. So I have printed my pattern at about 80%, so it is not as large as the original pattern. Otherwise, it would not fit on a screen. So what you want to do, if you want to follow me along, is simply grab the main panel where you want to add your pocket. So for me, this is the front panel for my tote bag. And that's basically what you need. You only need that pattern. You're not going to cut it or anything like this. We're only going to mark a couple of lines just so we have a guidelines. And then what you will need is just few pieces of paper so we can trace those new pattern pieces separately. So I found this process much easier than on this particular project, on this particular pocket, cut my pattern in pieces and add seam allowance, because we need to create three separate pattern pieces. It's just easier if we actually trace our pattern using the original pattern as a baseline. So what you want to do first is simply decide where you want to add your zipper pocket. So like I mentioned, this is the front panel, and I wanted to add my pocket more or less along the top. So if we divide this panel in two sections, it's more or less along the half second part. So what you can do is to take pen or pencil and a ruler and draw a line that is parallel to the top, unless your pattern has like a curve or weird shaping to it. What you want to do is to make sure you are drawing perpendicular line to the base. Usually the base is more or less straight in most patterns. If your pattern for some reason has a shaping, make sure to draw straight lines so it is not wonky. Although you can create this pocket at an angle, process would be very similar. So but I like to add just a straight pocket to mine. So let me just measure, let's say about 10 centimeters from the top. I'm just going to measure that quickly and draw a straight line. If you've got any questions, feel free to write them in the chat. If I see them, I'll try to answer your question as we go along. So this line here represents the top edge of your zipper when your pocket is constructed. So what you want to do now, let me just show you exactly what I mean on this finished bag, because sometimes I find it's easier to just show you than explain stuff. So the line that we just drew is basically the top edge, the seam the top seam where we're stitching our zipper. So that's the line that we just marked on our pattern. So the next step is to decide what seam allowance are you going to use to sew your zipper, because we need to figure out what is the visible portion of the zipper. The size of that, the size of your zipper, and also how much space is visible will determine how big is our placket. So what I usually do is to take a zipper that I want to use for my particular bag. And it doesn't matter what kind of zipper you want to use. Number 3, number 5, metal, plastic, coils. It doesn't really matter. What's important here is that the zipper that you're going to use on your bag is the same zipper that we are going to measure now. So if you have it on hand, grab it, because what you want to do is to simply measure the width of your zipper tape. And that will differ for different sizes of zipper. If I had zipper number 3 zipper, it would probably a little bit narrower. So that's why it's important to measure the zipper that you are planning to use on your bag. Most of the time, number 5 zippers have about 32 millimeters width, and that's exactly what this zipper is. So once you know the width of your zipper, then you need to decide, like I mentioned, what seam allowance are you going to use to sew your zipper. So if I put that back on show again, you need to decide you're going to sew the zipper on both sides. And we need to take away the seam allowance on both sides. So let's say I'm going to use 7 millimeter seam allowance. This is kind of my standard seam allowance when sewing zippers. So if I calculate this now, so my zipper is 32 millimeters, and then I need to deduct 7 millimeters along one side of the zipper, because we're sewing the zipper on one side, and then 7 millimeters on the other side of the zipper. So deduct your seam allowance twice. So for me, that will be 14 millimeters, because 7 plus 7 is 14. So the visible portion of the zipper for me, it's 18 millimeters. So that portion where you actually can see the zipper once your project is finished is 18 millimeters for me. If you are going to use different size of a zipper or different seam allowance, that will change. So that's why we are calculating that, and that's why you have to decide now what seam allowance you're going to use when you are sewing your zipper. If you choose different seam allowance now and then later during construction you're going to use different seam allowance, your panel will change shape. So it's going to either be a little bit taller or shorter depending on your seam allowance. So that's why now we are deciding what seam allowance we're going to use to sew our zipper. So once you've got that measurement, for me that's 18 millimeters, what you want to do is to draw a parallel line to the first line. So I'm going to measure 18 millimeters and draw another line below the first one. Here you go. So this portion is that visible portion of the zipper, this area here. So now I know exactly how to divide my panels to make my pocket. But what you want to do next, before we start tracing our pattern, is to decide how long is your placket. You want to make sure that your placket is longer than visible portion of the zipper. Otherwise, if the fabric slightly shift, or maybe you don't cut it as precisely as you should, that happens often to me, you will see your zipper. So again, I'm going to show you this on camera. If I didn't cut my placket slightly longer, there is a possibility that the placket can shift and move, and then my zipper would be picking out when I'm wearing my bag. And to be honest, if the zipper is the same color as the fabric, it doesn't really matter as much. But as you can see, I have a white zipper, so I wanted to make sure my zipper is fully concealed underneath that placket. So what you want to do is to simply make this placket longer than that space. So I usually add between 5 to maybe 7 or 10 millimeters to this area. So if we stitch the top panel with the placket, I make my placket slightly longer, so whatever happens, if the fabric shifts a little bit, or me not, or if I don't cut it precisely, I have always room for an error to ensure that that zipper is concealed. So I'm going to take a red pen, and let's say, since this is just a demonstration, I'm going to add 5 millimeters. So I'm going to make my placket 5 millimeters longer than the visible portion of the zipper. Here you go. So this space is that extra space that ensures that my zipper will be well hidden beneath that placket. So now that we have those 3 lines, we can start tracing and making a copy of our pattern to create individual pattern pieces. So as I mentioned on the beginning, we are not going to cut our pattern because we need to create 3 separate pattern pieces. And we do want to keep this for later because, for example, if I want to add the pocket only to the front, I still need this pattern to cut the back and also my lining. So instead of me cutting this pattern piece and then I would have to print another pattern piece and put it all together, it's easier in this instance to simply make a copy. So I already prepped my paper. I stick together 2 pages of printing paper, just a regular printing paper, because that was large enough. And what you want to do first is to trace the main pocket. So this area where it actually is the pocket, you want to trace it. And we need to trace it up to the bottom edge of our zipper opening. So those black lines and the wiggly line here, again, is the visible portion of the zipper. So this line and this line is where I'm sewing my zipper. The red line is the edge of my placket. So for the first pattern piece, to create the first pattern piece, we want to trace our pattern around up to the second line. So the black line, that is the bottom edge of our zipper opening. So what I like to do is to simply fold my pattern along that line. And now I can trace it around all sides. And then we're going to add seam allowance along this top edge. So let me just quickly trace that. If you've got any notches, you want to make sure you mark them. Any midpoints, you are basically creating new pattern piece. So whatever markings you have on your original pattern, make sure to trace them as well. And then I'm going to just trace the top edge. Here we go. I have a grain line here, so I'm going to mark my grain line. My grain line is perpendicular to the base, so I'm just going to take my ruler and simply mark that on my new pattern. My notches, my midpoints, I've got everything. So now what we have to do is to add seam allowance along this top edge, so we can actually sew our zipper, because at the moment we slashed our pattern into the two different sections. So if you do not add seam allowance along this line, you automatically making your panel shorter, because when you are actually going to sew your pocket, you have to take away that seam allowance. So for me, I'm going to grab my red pen. I decided to add 7 millimeters, because that was the seam allowance I decided to use to sew my zipper. So I'm going to measure 7 millimeters and simply draw a parallel line above, just like that. So this area here is my seam allowance. So next, what you can do is to add a label and then cut out your pattern. So, but before I do that, there is one thing I want to mention, especially on oddly shaped pattern pieces like this. Unless you have a straight 90-degree angles on your pattern, you'll have to true your seam allowance. I'll show you exactly what I mean in a second. So let me just quickly cut out this pattern just along the sides. But before I go to the top, I'm going to add extra. I'm going to leave extra piece of paper so I can true my seam. You will see in a second exactly what I mean. All right. So to true the seam, especially along weirdly shaped, oddly shaped pattern pieces, what you want to do is to take your pattern and fold it along the stitching line. So this black line here is my stitching line. The red one is the edge of the pattern, which I'm going to cut away, but the black line here is the stitching line. So what you want to do is to fold your pattern along that line. And now you can simply cut along your sides. So I'll just take my scissors and cut it just like that on both sides. So what it does when you unfold it, it creates this angle, and it adds a little bit of shaping to your seam allowance, because when we're going to sew our seam, let me just cut this top away. When we're going to sew our zipper, we're going to fold the seam allowance underneath. And to make sure we have enough fabric on the wrong side, that's why we need to true the seams. Again, this really depends on the shape of your main panel. I wanted to make sure I mentioned that just in case, because on this particular pattern, even if I traced my pattern and then carry on drawing my seam allowance straight, because that's the straight edge, and I would cut it like this. I don't know if you can see that on camera. Let me just bring it up. You see, this is how much I've added this little triangle. On different patterns, that might be a more of a difference. So if you sew your zipper, you may end up with fabric that is on your seam allowance that is not enough to even catch your seam allowance when you're sewing your side seams. So just in case, I'm not sure what pattern you are using to, modify and hack. I wanted to mention that. So it's always good practice if you are modifying patterns, or if you are not sure exactly which direction you're going to press the seam allowance. It's always best to add that extra bit along the sides, just to be sure. So what I would have to do now is just cut this bottom edge, because that's the edge of my pattern, and add my label. So I would write the name of the pattern, which is tote bag, and let's call this pocket. You can write hidden zipper pocket if you want to be very precise. If you have different modifications for the same pattern, I would be really precise when I'm modifying my pattern. But for the purpose of this demonstration, I'll just keep it short and sweet. And what we need to do is to cut it one time from external fabric and then one time from lining fabric. Because I mentioned, let me show you the bag. I mentioned that the pocket is fully lined. So if I open the zipper, this portion here is that what we just traced. So we need to cut it one time from external fabric and then one time from our lining fabric. So next, this pattern is now finished. So what we can do, if you want, you can add the midpoint along the top. I'm sure you know how to do it. And now we can start tracing another pattern. So let me just bin this paper. So next, now we can trace the pocket lining, which is behind our pocket. So I'm not sure if you are familiar with the constructions of zipper pockets, but there is always one part. So there is lining on one side and then lining on the other side to ensure our pocket is beautifully finished inside and out. So we've traced the front of our bag with that lining inside. And now we need to trace the other pocket lining because this part is longer because it has to go behind the zipper. So we need to trace another pattern piece that is slightly longer. So let me show you what to look at when you look at your pattern. So now to trace the pocket lining, what you want to do is to again trace the entire outline of your pattern, but this time we are tracing it up to the top line. So before we traced up to the bottom pocket opening, and now we are tracing it up to this line. So again, you can take your pattern piece, fold it along that top line and trace it. So I'm going to quickly trace the outline. Again, make sure to mark all your midpoints, your notches, any other markings that you have on your pattern piece. You want to make sure your pattern is as clear as possible because you are still making the same project. The only difference is that you are customizing your bag with that zipper pocket. Here we go. Again, I would have to make sure I mark my grain line. And in the same way, we've added seam allowance along the top in the previous pattern piece. We need to do exactly the same thing now. And again, because we are sewing the zipper, we need to add the same seam allowance. So for me, that is 7 millimeters. You can add whatever seam allowance you decided to add to your pattern. So I'm going to add that. And again, to make sure, our seam allowance is large enough, we don't run out of it along the sides, we can true our pattern. But I'm not going to do that because you already know how to do it from the first pattern piece. So all you have to do here is to add label. So again, I would write tote bag, and let's call this pocket lining. And we need to cut it one time from lining fabric. Here you go. Then I would cut out my pattern and it would be ready to go. So that's 2 pattern pieces now done. And lastly, we have to create the last pattern for the top panel. So let me take my paper and I show you what we're going to do on this bag again. So now we have this top part of our main panel that we need to trace, including our placket. So I'm going to show you how to add this placket to your pattern now. So again, take your main panel piece, this piece of paper. This time we need to trace the top panel up to the red line, which is the edge of our placket. That's extra bit to make sure our zipper is hidden. So again, I'm going to fold my pattern piece, but this time I'm folding it along the red line. So let me just trace the top. Again, mark all your midpoints, notches, everything that you have on your pattern. And now I'm going to fold my pattern along this red line. So it's always good to make that crease beforehand. And I'm going to trace it along the bottom. There you go. You can always start by drawing a line first on your paper if you don't want to do it this way. So let's say I wanted to trace that pattern piece. I could draw a straight line first, then take my pattern and then line up that line along the red line and then trace the top edge. That could be much actually easier way to do it than what I just did, but I guess I'm used to my way, so I've done it this way. So let me just fix the top edge because it's not really visible. Here we go, that's better. So now instead of adding um, seam allowance along this top edge to sew the zipper, that would be an option if you wanted to sew just a regular zipper without a placket. That would be basically the process. But because we want to add that placket, we need to account for an extra fabric. So at the moment, our placket is up to the fold line. So when you are tracing your pattern, to this red line, you are tracing your pattern up to the edge of the placket. So let me show you again my bag. So we've traced the top edge up to this folded edge. So I'm not sure if you can see that on camera. Here is the bottom edge of my placket. That was basically the red line. But because the under portion of the placket, under flap, whatever you want to call it, is a continuation, is the same fabric. This is just folded along this edge. We need to add that extra bit of fabric to make sure we actually create the placket by folding the fabric along this edge. So to do that, all you have to do is simply add the same amount of space that is from the top line to the bottom line. So that's extra space. So that the space that is basically the visible portion of the zipper plus extra bit for this placket. So if you want, you can take your ruler and measure it. For me, that was 18 millimeters for the visible portion of the zipper plus 5. So that's 23 millimeters. So I can simply take my ruler now and measure 23 millimeters and draw a parallel line to create my placket, just like that. So let me just extend those lines. Here we go. And now we can add our seam allowance because this portion is the visible fabric before it is actually stitched to the zipper. So here along the bottom edge, we're going to sew our zipper. So we need to add our seam allowance. So for me, again, that's 7 millimeters. Here we go. Again, I would have to add my grain line and label my pattern. So let's call this tote bag. Let's call this top panel. And we need to cut it one time from external fabric. There you go. So our pattern pieces are now basically traced and created. Again, you would have to what's the word I'm using for? Through the seam allowance. So to through the seam allowance along the placket, you need to fold your pattern along this line, along the first line that you drew, because that's the fold line of our placket. And whatever is underneath, that's basically the under placket that is, not visible when you look at your project from the front. So now you can take scissors and cut your pattern. So this way you can see this time, because of the shape of my pattern, my placket kind of tends to go inwards, not like on this pattern piece. When we drew the pattern, it went outward. So that's really depend on the shape of your pattern and which direction you're going to fold and press your fabric. And I know I'm going to fold my fabric along the placket and then sew the zipper underneath. So I know that's how I know that I need to fold my pattern like this and cut along this side edges. So to complete the pattern, I can cut it along that red line and along the top. There you go. So my pattern, my original pattern, has stitching line as well included in the pattern. You can do that on your pattern as well if you prefer it. Otherwise, you can always write what seam allowance it is, especially if you are modifying your patterns and you want to make sure you keep consistent seam allowance. So I know my original pattern has 1.5 centimeter seam allowance around all the original seams. So for example, if we take this pattern piece, my seam allowance would be 1.5 along the sides. I could draw kind of like dashed line if I wanted to, and also along the top, because I did not amend any of those edges. The only seam that is changed, because we are adding it, it's not included in the original pattern, because that is that modification that we today created, is along the zipper plus the placket on this particular pattern. The same goes for the other two. My sides and my base stays the same. So again, if I wanted to add my seam allowance, I could draw those dashed lines on my pattern, but it's not really necessary. I like to add them, especially if I'm creating very structured bags and I want to use, let's say, fusible stabilizers, and I want to keep the stabilizers out of the seam allowance. This way, I can easily fold my seam allowance under, and I can easily create and cut my stabilizer without the seam allowance, without me needing to trace the pattern one more time, unless it's like oddly shaped and has curves. Then it's more difficult. Then yeah, I would probably trace it and cut it out without seam allowance to create separate template for the stabilizer. But that is not part of today's class because we are just making a hidden zipper pocket. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to show you today. I hope you found this modification, interesting. I really like these type of pockets because they look very nice, sleek, and kind of seamless. If you make it even longer, you don't even see your zipper pull. At the moment, I do see it because the placket is not long enough to cover it. But if you made it longer, you wouldn't even be able to see the pocket, especially on a busy fabric print like I used on this tote bag. So yeah, I really like those types of pockets. And as you can see, to add a hidden zipper pocket like this to your bag is really, really simple pattern modification. And I have a lot more to come in the future. I have got so many different ideas that I want to share with you guys. So I hope you enjoyed this little demonstration. In the next video, I'm going to show you exactly how to assemble it, because if you are not familiar with this type of pocket, it might be a little bit confusing at first. So I want to make sure, I'm transparent. I don't hide any information from you. And since already you know how to modify your pattern, I want to make sure that you know how to actually assemble it. And I already filmed that tutorial. I just have to edit it. So it will probably be live on my YouTube channel next week. So till then, you have time to modify your pattern, to play with your pattern pieces. And if you've got any questions whatsoever, drop them below this tutorial. You can always email me, and I'm happy to take any your ideas, anything that you would like to see in the future. I would love to take this into consideration, and hopefully share everything that I know with you guys in the future. So that's all from me today. I knew it's going to be a shorter tutorial than usual, but this is a very simple modification, so it doesn't take any time at all, especially if you don't have to talk. If you just have to trace it and cut it out, it literally takes 10 minutes, so you can do it in no time. So that's all from me. Thank you very much again for hanging around with me, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay crafty, friends. Bye.